The Sex Pistols were a boy band. My man, you don't even know that you've unleashed one of my favorite topics to school people on. So to catch people up, if you're not lurking in my comments, the assertion of this commenter is that emo was nothing more than a fashion movement. It had nothing to do with the music. It was just fashion, probably referring to, the Hot Topic movement, the mallcore, and compares it to other anti-establishment movements like punk and metal and goth, a more pure musical art form. And specifically, I'm going to talk about punk, because if you're talking about punk and you're saying punk was not a fashion movement, I got to tell you, unless you're talking about maybe New York leather and blue jeans, Patti Smith, the Ramones, if you want to go before that, proto-punk with the New York Dolls or the Stooges, maybe you could get away with saying that. But I would then compare that to emo that came, before Hot Topic, with your flannels and your nerdy glasses or the hardcore movement in DC. If you're going to compare apples to apples, when people think of punk, what do they think of? They think of the safety pins, and they think of probably the British punk movement. If you're going to talk about that, know your history, because that was 100% a manufactured fashion movement. People don't realize this, but the Sex Pistols, who are responsible for a lot of the look of what punk became in the late 70s, into the 80s, anarchy in the UK, go watch SLC Punk, by the way. A lot of what people associate with the look of punk that came from the Sex Pistols was manufactured. The Sex Pistols were a boy band. Malcolm McLaren was a manager at CBGB in New York, and he saw what was happening in the punk movement, and he went back to the UK, went back to London, and he had an anti-fashion clothing store. Now, you can call it anti-fashion all you want. That's a fashion store. It's a clothing line. And it was selling that look, the safety pins and the torn up stuff and the mohawks and all of that. And they needed somebody to sell their fashion line. So what did they do? They made a boy band. They got Johnny Rotten and they got Sid Vicious, and they put together a band to sell the look of punk, the anti-fashion. And the store was called Sex. So what did they call their band to sell their look? The Sex Pistols. Fashion. The look of punk as we know it today is 100% a fashion line, the same way that Hot Topic and the look of that mix of goth became the look of emo with the eyeliner and the swoopy hair. So don't tell me that these things didn't become fashion. Of course they did. Just like goth, Robert Smith became the look of goth, and all of a sudden they were selling goth. Trip pants and things like that was the look of goth. Hair metal in the 80s became a fashion. You had to look the part to be in metal. Lemmy himself is the look of metal. So yeah, once you build a subculture, that becomes a uniform sub for the subculture. That does not take away from the fact that the subculture started separate from the fashion, but these things all become part of the subculture. The fashion becomes part of the subculture, and punk is not separated from that. Metal is not separated from that. Goth is not separated from that. All these things become fashion as well as a scene develops. Emo was around before the scene, just like punk and goth and metal, but they all become fashion brands 100%, dude.